Hey there, I'm Anthony from KodeKloud. Are you ready to get your Istio running on your Kubernetes cluster? In this hands-on demo, I'll show you how to install Istio using the Istio CLI. Let's get started. And be sure to subscribe and like at the end if you find this useful.
In order to install Istio, you need a running Kubernetes cluster. You can use Amazon EKS, GKE, the Google's, or even Azure's AKS. If you want to do a local environment, you can use either Kind or Minikube, but you do need a running Kubernetes cluster. There are two options when it comes to installing Istio. You can use the Istio CTL, which is the Istio CLI tool, or you can use Helm. We will review both ways as you will be asked to install Istio, and it could be using either option. I'm going to go with the Istio CTL, but it's worth, knowing how to install Istio with Helm, because if you're using it in production, you probably want to use Helm. You're not going to be using Istio CTL to install that. Now, before installing Istio, you need to download Istio CTL. Essentially, we will be using Istio 1.18.2 as that is what the ICI exam environment will be. It is quite behind. The latest, I think, is 1.25.2, I think. So it's quite behind, but that's what is based on the exam. And it has changed a little bit, but not crazy amount of new things. So we're going to stick with 1.18 because that's what the exam is on. You can find all of Istio's releases in GitHub. You can just head to GitHub Istio and find all of the releases. But in page 8, you can find the version that we're going to need, which is 1.18. And that's the one that we have to install. You can virtually use any Linux distribution. You can use the curl command, pass in the version of Istio CTL you want to install. And once Istio is installed, you can essentially change into the directory or the downloaded folder. And using the export, you include the path environment variable, and you can confirm that Istio CTL is running. You can see here that it says no pods in the Istio system, and that's because we installed, or this diagram right here, the screenshot, you installed Istio CTL, but you haven't installed Istio itself on the cluster. So don't get confused. Istio CTL version is just checking the version, and it's just telling us that it's that 1.18.2. You also need to install kubectl, kubectl, whatever you want to call. You need this installed in your environment, and this is how you would install it, depending whether you're on a 64-bit or ARM64. I suspect that a lot of people already have this installed. It will be available on our labs. So you don't have to worry about it, but I just thought it's worth noting. If you want to install both Istio CTL and kubectl in your own OS X terminal, you can use Brew. If you're not familiar with Brew, it's really just a package manager for OS X. Keep in mind that the version of Istio we're going to use is 1.18.2. So if you do end up going with Brew on your Mac OS X, make sure that you download and install the version we're going to be working on. But in our labs, like I said, they'll all be 1.18.2. Now, once we have the kubectl, kubectl, and Istio CTL on our terminal, we can have a look at Istio's profiles. Istio does include a few profiles here, as you can see. And here's just a quick overview of the profiles. On the left here, you can see the core components. And on the right side, you can see all of the profiles. There might be one or two missing here, but you have the default profile, which doesn't include the egress gateway for some reason. The demo that includes all but the ambient mesh stuff. That's CNI and Z-tunnel. That's the ambient mesh mode, which we're not going to be talking about or going over. So the demo is the profile we're most likely use. You have that minimal that only has the Istio D component, the control plane. You have remote and empty. And then you have this preview profile that it seems to be the same as the default. And of course, you have the ambient profile, which uses no sidecar. So it's a sidecarless mode. To install Istio using Istio CTL, we can run the Istio CTL install. We set a profile. We pass the -y for yes. It should take a few minutes, and then you can confirm by checking the pods in the Istio system namespace. And you can see right here that we have the egress and the ingress gateway, as well as the Istio D. That tells me that Istio is installed. It's important to note that nothing happens if you install Istio other than a few resources. Like none of your applications will be impacted. And that's because Istio is installed, but it's not enabled. And if you want to use Istio, you need to enable it. Assuming you already have, the workloads, for example, like in the screenshot, in your Kubernetes cluster, you can inspect them. We know that Istio will inject a sidecar, but these deployments that you see right here, these pods, all read one of one, meaning that there's only one container running in these pods, which means that there is no Istio sidecar proxy injected in them. To enable Istio, we can label the namespace. And after labeling it, so you can see right here, we're just labeling it Istio-injection equals enabled. After enabling it, you can confirm that the label is there and check. Now, once you see that injection enabled right there, you can check if your workloads in that namespace have Istio sidecar. Now, if you see this one of one right here, you don't have to worry about it. You can just delete or recreate it. But the labeling of the namespace works great because it allows you to control where you want to use Istio. If you just install Istio and it would enable across everything, that means that every namespace would have a sidecar injected. And you'd be consuming a lot more resources. So the fact that you have to enable a namespace to use it is, I think it's a genius way of controlling those resources. Like I said, you can spend all the time, restarting the deployments, or you can just delete. For example, this book info right here application, we can recreate it again. We can check the pods, and now you can see this 2 of 2, which means that the Istio sidecar proxy is injected. You can easily inspect the pod to see what containers it has and verify that one of the running containers inside the pod is the Istio proxy along with the app pod. In this case, you can see the details container, and then you can see the Istio proxy, and there's the image right here that Istio proxy is using. Let's say that you don't want to, enable a whole namespace for Istio injection. You just want to inject particular workloads. So you can do a manual sidecar injection. Now you do need to have a manifest YAML file in the system. So let's just say you pull down that book info using wget, that book info.yaml file. And then using istioctl, you can kube inject and add the Istio sidecar proxy to the deployment without labeling the whole namespace. This is definitely going to be in the exam. We will look more into this later on, but just FYI, this is how you would do a manual sidecar injection. And you can just get your pods, and you can see that they will have this 2 of 2. Now, if you're using Helm, you need to install 3 components. So first, you pull down the Istio the chart, and you need to, like I said, 3 components. You need the Istio base. And this chart includes the cluster-wide resources like service accounts, cluster roles, binding, etc., all that jazz. You have the Istio D chart, and this is the control plane, essentially the brain of Istio, very, very important. And finally, you need the Istio ingress. And this chart is used to deploy the ingress and egress gateways to the cluster. Once the components are installed, you can pretty much use Istio in the same manner as we discussed using Istio CTL. Istio CTL does have a few options, really important ones, 2 in particular that I can think of right now. So you can use Istio CTL to validate an Istio YAML file, which is important so you don't apply files that have syntax errors, for example. So you can see right here that I can use istioctl validate and then the name of the file, and it tells me if it's valid. If there's any errors here, it will tell me that it can't, it doesn't know what X, Y, Z means, or for example. So really, really important. We are going to use that. You can verify the installation, though note that this does take quite a long time. And I don't think it's going to be in the certification exam, but if they do ask in a multiple choice question, for example, istioctl verify install, we'll go through the whole installation. It takes over 20, 30 minutes. And possibly the most important command that will be super, super useful is the Istio CTL analyze command. This -a is for all namespaces, for example, and it allows you to see all of if there's any errors, really. And we're going to be using this throughout the course, and I advise that you always use it, especially in the ICA exam. There's one way of just analyzing that one namespace. This is probably the one that you want to use during the exam. Whenever you write an Istio configuration file, any resources for Istio, you run the Istio CTL analyze -n and the name of the namespace, and it will pick up any errors if there's any. And it's always good to know that you made a syntax error or something. But enough talk. Let's head to a terminal and start practicing, because after all, the ICA is hands-on. Now, before we can start using Istio, we need to downloaded. Now, first thing I want to check is if Kubernetes is running and if any workloads are in here. So kubectl get pods -a. Yep, it's running there. Let's do kubectl. I guess there's nothing in the default namespace. Nope. Now, I want to install something in here. So I'm going to use one of Istio's example workloads. And it's this book info application. Now, if you are not familiar with Kubernetes, I strongly recommend that you first take one of our Kubernetes courses here at KodeKloud. You can get caught up, learn about Kubernetes before you continue on. But if you are familiar with Kubernetes, then you might have seen this sample book info application. Now, the workload itself is not really important. What is important here is that it is running. So let's do kubectl get pods. And if we do that, there you go. It's still creating it, but I'm convinced that this is going to work here in a few seconds. So the next thing we want to do is download. While this is creating it, let's download Istio. So I'm going to copy another command here. And I am downloading Istio 1.18.2 because the exam is based on this version. So it's best that we install the version that we're going to be tested on. So I'm going to go ahead and download that. And I'm going to run the get pods again. Yep, they're all running there. Now you can see right here. One thing that we want to check is let's describe one of these pods so you can understand what's going to happen once Istio is installed and it starts injecting the sidecars. Let's do kubectl describe pod details. And if you scroll up here, you will see the containers component, and you'll see there's only one container running in this pod. There's the details, there's the image, the port that this is running on, etc. Now, what's going to happen is when we install Istio, we should see another container in here that contains the Istio proxy. So let me clear this out of the way. Now, the first thing we need to do is install Istio. We downloaded it and we have it in here. So we are going to go into Istio here, .2, and we are going to add the export. So we're going to do export path equals, and there's a variable pwd. If you don't know what that is, this is print working directory. We're going to put this to bin, and we're going to pass it into our path. Now, if we do which Istio CTL, you'll see that it's in there. And if we do Istio CTL version, you should get this. And this is basically saying the version you're using 1.18.2, but there is no Istio pods in the Istio system namespace. And it makes sense because we haven't actually installed it. So now I want to do Istio CTL install, and we're going to set the profile to demo. And I'm going to do a -y. Now I know that in the presentation, we showed the default profile, and you could do that if you're running your own Kubernetes cluster. But inside of our labs, because the default profile is a little heavy when it comes to resources, we are going to use the demo. I'm going to go ahead and install this, and it's going to install the core components, which is Istio base, Istio-D, and then it is the demo profile. So it's going to install both gateways, the ingress and the egress gateways. And once this is set up, you can see right here, ingress and gateway here. Let me go ahead and clear this out of the way. Let's do kubectl get pods, and let's check the Istio system namespace. And you can see here that we have our 3 pods, Istio-D, which is our core, our control plane. And then we have the ingress and the egress gateways. So that's set all and done. Let's do kubectl get pods again for that workload. And you can see that there's 1 of 1. So now how do we actually inject the sidecar proxy? Well, that's easy. We need to label a namespace in here. So one of the things that we can also check with Istio is to verify if Istio is running in a particular namespace. So we can do Istio CTL analyze and then pass in the name of the namespace. And you'll see right here that this will tell you right away. It says the namespace is not enabled for Istio injection, and it actually kindly gives you the exact command you have to run. So we'll do kubectl label namespace, and I'm just going to copy all of this right here, and I'm going to paste it. And now if I rerun the analyze again, we should see, and it says, hey, don't worry about these warnings for now. That's okay. Basically, what this is saying right here is that the proxy is not mounted in there. And the reason it's not mounted is because we created the workload before Istio was installed and before we labeled the namespace. So a quick way to do this, let's delete and reapply this. You could restart the workloads, but I'm going to delete and then I'm going to recreate. So let's do a command actually here. Let's do kubectl get ns, so namespaces, and let's do show labels. And you can see right here that the only namespace that is labeled is the default one. Nothing else has this Istio injection enabled, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and clear this out of the way. Let's get pods again. And this is still terminating, but now we can, let's do a watch on this until it's done. Oh, and it's just finished. So now what we could do is reapply the workload. I'm going to reapply the workload. Yep, it's created. I'm going to clear this out of the way and let's do get pods. And you can see right now that instead of 1 of 1, which is this is the number of containers in the pod, now we get 2 of 2. So now let's inspect one of these. Let's do kubectl get pods. Let's do kubectl describe pod details. And if we scroll up here, you'll see that there's a lot more information than there was before. You see all these environment variables. They weren't there before. And if we scroll up right here under the containers, you'll see the details container. And now we have the Istio proxy container. And this is passing a lot of information. Don't worry about that for now. But we have installed Istio. So let me clear this out of the way. Let's do kubectl get pods. And you can see that they all have this sidecar proxy mounted. Now, this was automatic injection. Now let's have a look at how we can manually inject the Envoy proxy. Now, the first thing I want to do is maybe create a new namespace. So let's do kubectl create, let's one call db, right? So now if we do get ns and show labels, you'll see that db doesn't have the injection enabled. So any workload that we create here will not have the Istio sidecar and proxy injection. So let me create a pod really quickly here. So let's do kubectl run, and we'll call this Redis no proxy. And we're going to use we're going to pass it in the DB namespace. And let me use the image Redis. And let's do that. So now let's do kubectl get pods in the DB namespace. And it's creating it. It's okay. It's going to work. And it worked right there. And this is called the no proxy. Now, what I want to do now is create the same namespace, but the way that we did it right here, this is an imperative mode, it's called. If you're familiar with imperative and declarative, this is the imperative. We need to create a declarative way. So what I'm going to do is rerun this again. Now I'm going to name this just Redis. And I am going to do the try run equals client. I'm going to spit it out as a YAML. That looks good there for me right now. And I'm going to write this to a file called pod.yaml. Clear this out of the way. And now we have our pod.yaml in here. So what we can do now is we can inject it manually on creation. So let's do Istio CTL kube inject. We're going to pass in the name of the file, which is the pod. And then we're going to pipe it to kubectl apply-f-. And what this is going to do is going to create that Redis pod, but now it's going to inject the sidecar. So let's do the get pods for the DB now. And you can see the difference between the Redis no proxy and the Redis with the proxy. If we inspect this, CTL describe DB and just Redis. DB describe pod. Excuse me. You'll see right here that we have both of our containers in here. So now we have our Redis container and we have our Istio container. And that sums it up for installing Istio using the Istio CTL with a profile.
If you're interested in mastering Istio and leveling up your cloud native skills, check out our comprehensive Istio Certified Associate course on KodeKloud. We offer hands-on labs, real-world examples, and everything you need to pass the ICA exam. Click the link below and get started today.